The folly, as a general term, folly is usually applied to a small building or contraption that appears to have no practical function, or the purpose of which appears less important than its striking and unusual design. They're generally eccentric and often exotic designs. But the term is ultimately subjective, so a precise definition is elusive. And it's subjective because you will see there are different ways of looking at some of these buildings or artifacts. In Architectural Folly is a building constructed primarily for decoration or ornament, generally in a garden setting and suggesting through its appearance some other purpose, often beyond the realm of the possible, so extravagant that it transcends the range of garden ornaments, the class of buildings to which follies belong, theoretically, and engaging the imagination in an alternate reality or in alternate realities. This notion of the invention of architecture in the landscape can be traced to, in modern times, to the beginning or the invention, the beginning, I should say, or the origins of landscape painting, which towards the middle of the 17th century began to take shape and form as a manner of expressing the physical world. And painting then, at the time, was viewed less concerned with liturgical or religious subject matters, but rather subjects that bring us closer, in their minds at least, in the mind of the authors of the Renaissance and then eventually of the Baroque period, which is what the 17th century is, of a natural world. So in the paintings of the pastoral paintings, landscapes of Lorraine, for instance, from mid-19th century, there are, from the mid-17th century rather, there are these landscape paintings begin to describe fictional narrative, fictional themes that are ultimately less critical to the composition than the landscape itself. And in this landscape, these landscapes are inhabited by these fictional architectural events or circumstances. They could be bridges, they could be or houses, cities. And in this case, in midground, foreground, as you can see, is are two shepherds, we can surmise, talking business, you know. And in midground is what seems to be a recollection of the Temple of Sibila in Tivoli. In other words, it's real. It's a real reference, but it's an invented circumstance, an invented place where these events takes place. And so the folly then, since and we will understand, I think, better when and where it is that these particular building type, if we can recall that, begins to participate in, at the very least, in garden design in the Western world. There are exotic, eccentric examples like these chinoiserie pavilions, one sitting in the middle of a lake, one tucked onto a forest, the edge of a forest. Geometries, eccentric geometries like elongated pyramids, temple fronts, classical buildings reconsidered for the purpose of a landscape ornament. But these are temple fronts that are modeled and based on actual buildings. The one on the right, on the left, for instance, is a reconsideration of the treasury of the Athenians at Delphi. Houses, invented houses, eccentric houses, exotic houses, towers, ziggurat towers, medieval campaniles, tents, as you can see here. These are Gustavian tents from, which is a very strong reference or inspiration in Swedish garden design. Monsters, like monsters and phoenix and how should I put it? Again, sort of invented forms and shapes, in this case, anthropomorphically speaking, linked in some way to the human body. Castles or gates, castles and gates, bridges that go nowhere, that are there simply to bring us to a different place in our imagination, in our minds. Ruins, the ruin is a favorite theme of Folly. In this case, we're looking at a Gothic ruin on the left-hand side, and of course, a classic Roman one. Again, a Temple of Sibila, like in that painting by Lorraine, as a garden folly. Because the folly is, by its very nature, a fanciful artifice of a kind, drawing follies is often an opportunity to do beautiful renditions, beautiful things, as we can see here in these chinoiserie examples. One of them, the one to the left, being held by pawns, as you can see, but they're invented. They're invented, and they are and they are different. They don't seem to serve any practical purpose. Perhaps as a gazebo or a pavilion is one way of looking at it, and therefore free to the imagination.